My daughter smiled and handed me the herbal tea, a sweet smile I had watched for 35 years. "Drink this, Mom. It'll do you good," she said. But a cold premonition made me gently slide that cup over to my son-in-law. A few minutes later, the color drained from his face, and his body collapsed to the floor in a violent seizure, and I knew that the daughter I loved with every fiber of my being had just tried to murder me. My name is Diane. I'm 72 years old, a retired librarian from the small town of Stockbridge, and this is the story of the 35 years I unknowingly lived with and raised a monster. If my story touches you, please leave a heart, share it with those you love, and don't forget to follow our channel. And if you've ever had the heartbreaking experience of betrayal within your own family, please share your story in the C Times comments below, so we know we're not alone. Stockbridge, Massachusetts, in the last days of October always has a kind of melancholy beauty, like an old poem reciting its final verses before sinking into its winter slumber. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of decaying maple leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys, seeping through every crack in the door. I love this air. At 72, after nearly 4 decades spent with the books in the town library, I've learned to appreciate the quiet and the subtle signs of the changing seasons. My home, a charming little Cape Cod cottage nestled behind a cedar hedge, is my sanctuary of that very peace. It's not just a structure of wood and plaster, it's a repository of memories, a shelter for the soul, with every corner smelling faintly of old paper, lemon-scented furniture polish, and a hint of the dried lavender I like to press between the pages of my books. The life of a retired librarian has its own rhythm, peaceful and predictable. My mornings begin with the sound of birds at my window and a steaming pot of Earl Grey tea. Afternoons are for immersing myself in the world of Jane Austen or the verses of Robert Frost. Evenings are often spent in the small garden out back, where the last of the daisies are still trying to hold on to a little bit of summer's glory. And Thursday afternoons, like an unbreakable tradition, were for Lillian, my daughter. Lillian was the gentle sun in my small universe. I adopted her when she was just 8, a tiny, quiet creature with big, round eyes that held a sadness I had spent 35 years of my life trying to soothe. Now, at 43, she had become a dedicated nurse at the Green Pastures nursing home, a woman the whole town admired for her composure and kindness. Her presence in my house, even for just a few hours each week, was enough to chase away the persistent loneliness of old age. She was the most beautiful chapter I thought fate had graciously bestowed upon me. That afternoon began like any other Thursday. I was sitting in my favorite floral armchair, Pride and Prejudice, open on my lap, though my mind was more focused on the golden leaves dancing outside the window. The doorbell rang, soft and punctual as always. I smiled, set my book aside, and went to open the door. Lillian stood there, in her crisply ironed, pale blue nurse's uniform, her brown hair neatly tied in a bun at the nape of her neck. She always exuded an air of tidiness, a cleanliness that was almost sterile. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice even and soft. She bent down to kiss my cheek, a fleeting touch of her lips, dry and almost devoid of emotion. I was used to it. Lillian was never one for grand displays of affection. Her love, I always told myself, was in her quiet care. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, taking her hand and pulling her inside. "You're right on time. I was just about to make a fresh pot of tea." "I brought some for you," Lillian said, holding up a small, unmarked brown paper bag. "It's a new herbal blend from work. They say it helps with relaxation and deeper sleep. I've noticed you've been a bit tired lately." I looked at the paper bag, a strange feeling stirring within me. I am a tea connoisseur, a small but intense passion of mine. I can distinguish the aroma of a spring Darjeeling from an autumn harvest, or recognize the subtle difference between an Assam and a Ceylon by scent alone. Lillian knew this. She often bought me rare teas from specialty shops, carefully packaged with clear names and origins. A nameless paper bag like this was not like her at all. "Oh, really, dear? What kind of herbs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's a mix, Mom. Chamomile, valerian root, and a few other special leaves for extra effect. Very good for older folks," Lillian explained, walking into the kitchen and placing the bag on the counter. It was that same flat voice, as if she were reading a doctor's order to a patient. I followed her into the kitchen, watching her every move. Lillian opened the paper bag, and a peculiar scent filled the air. It didn't smell like the warm, apple-like scent of chamomile or the earthy aroma of valerian root. It was something else, a chemical scent, sharp and cold, hidden beneath the herbal facade. I took a deep breath, and then I recognized it. A faint, almost imperceptible odor, but unmistakable to anyone who has ever read the classic detective novels, the smell of bitter almonds. My heart skipped a beat. I must be imagining things, I reassured myself. It's probably just some exotic herb from Asia I've never heard of. I couldn't let a wild thought ruin my peaceful afternoon with my daughter. "Let me make it," I said, reaching for the bag. "I have a new glass teapot. It'll be lovely for watching the flowers open up." Lillian didn't object, just took a step back, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, her eyes watching me. That gaze, I suddenly realized, wasn't the loving gaze of a daughter watching her mother. It was the gaze of a scientist observing an experiment, cold, focused, waiting. I tried to push away the growing unease. I boiled the water, warmed the pot and cups according to ritual. As I used the bamboo scoop to spoon the dried herbs from the bag, the almond scent hit me again, stronger this time. It was sharp, cutting through the fragrance of the chamomile like a wrong note in a gentle symphony. My hand trembled slightly. "They look interesting, don't they?" I remarked, trying to hide my confusion. "They're effective." "That's what matters," Lillian replied curtly. I poured the hot water into the pot. The petals and leaves began to dance, slowly releasing a pale, sunset yellow color. But my mind was no longer there. It was racing with questions. Why a nameless bag? Why this strange scent? Why is Lillian so quiet and watching me so differently? A flood of small, insignificant memories suddenly resurfaced. The neighbor's cat that died suddenly after scratching Lillian. The strange bout of food poisoning my best friend got after she suggested Lillian should be more independent. The natural deaths of several of my friends at Green Pastures, all of whom Lillian had taken a special interest in. No, it can't be. This was Lillian, my sweet girl. I had spent my life loving and protecting her. These thoughts were insane, the product of an old brain and an overactive imagination. I poured the tea into 2 white porcelain cups. A thin wisp of steam rose, carrying that deadly scent I could no longer deny. I placed 1 cup in front of Lillian and 1 for myself. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice sounding foreign, like someone else's. "Drink it while it's hot, Mom. It'll work better," Lillian said, a subtle urgency hidden behind her words of concern. She didn't touch her own cup. I sat down in the chair opposite her, my hands wrapped around the warm teacup, but a chill was spreading through me. What do I do? Drink it? Or refuse and confront a truth I didn't dare to imagine? My mind, honed by thousands of mystery novels and logic puzzles, began to analyze the situation. If I don't drink, she'll know I suspect something. What happens then? If I drink, and my instincts are right? Just then, the sound of a key turning in the front door lock was followed by the booming voice of Leo, Lillian's husband. "Diane, I'm home. Anything to eat? These kids at school wore me out today." Leo strode into the room, tossing his leather briefcase onto the sofa and loosening his tie. He was a history teacher, a kind, enthusiastic, and somewhat loud man, a complete contrast to Lillian's quiet demeanor. He was a breath of warm, fresh air in our little family. "Hello, dear," Lillian greeted him, her tone unchanged. "Hey, honey," Leo replied, stepping over to give his wife a quick peck on the forehead. "Hi, mother-in-law. What's that smell? Tea?" "Yes," I managed to smile. "Lillian just brought over a new herbal blend." "Fantastic! My throat is as dry as a desert," Leo said, and before I could stop him, he sat down beside me, reaching for his teacup. But then he paused, looking at the empty space next to it. "Oh, don't I get one?" "I'll get it," Lillian said, turning towards the kitchen. That was the moment, a brief instant that lasted only a few seconds, but for me, time stood still. Lillian had her back to us. Leo was busy complaining about one of his students. My survival instinct screamed, No thinking, no hesitation. It was an act born from the deepest well of motherly instinct, but not for the daughter in the kitchen. It was to protect myself. With a smooth, decisive movement, I slid my teacup across the polished wooden table, swapping its position with the glass of water Leo had just set down. My hand didn't shake. My mind was strangely clear and cold. The sound of the porcelain cup against the glass was faint, almost inaudible, drowned out by the sound of running water in the kitchen and Leo's voice. Lillian returned with an empty cup. She placed it in front of Leo. "Here you go." But Leo had already picked up the teacup he thought was mine. "No need, I'll just use this one. You don't mind, do you, Mom?" "No, of course not," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked up the glass of water, my palm damp with sweat. "A toast to the end of a long day," Leo said cheerfully, raising the teacup. I looked at Lillian. She was watching me, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, a smile of satisfaction. She thought I was about to drink. "Go on, Mom," Lillian urged again, her voice a little firmer this time. I watched Leo bring the cup to his lips. I wanted to scream, "Stop!" But what could I say? "Don't drink that. I think my daughter is trying to poison me?" They would think I'd lost my mind. I could only sit there, helpless, a spectator in a horrific play in which I was a central character. Leo took a large sip. "That's an interesting flavor," he commented. "A little sharp, but not bad." He set the cup down. Everything seemed normal. We continued to talk, or rather, Leo talked and I tried to respond with meaningless words. I don't remember what we said. My entire being was focused on Leo, watching his every breath, his every movement. Lillian was too. She sat still, her eyes darting from me to her husband, as if wondering why the medicine hadn't taken effect on me. About 5 minutes later, it happened. Leo was in the middle of telling a funny story about Napoleon, his hands gesturing animatedly. Suddenly, he stopped. The hand raised in midair began to tremble. The smile on his face froze, then twisted into a grimace. What's wrong with you?" Lillian asked, and for the first time all afternoon I heard something like surprise in her voice. "I can't breathe," Leo gasped, his eyes wide, looking at me with a mixture of pleading and utter confusion. He clutched at his throat with both hands, as if being strangled by an invisible force. Then his body began to convulse. Violently, the chair he was sitting on tipped backward. The teacup fell to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces, the pale yellow liquid splashing onto the Persian rug. The crash of porcelain was horribly loud in the quiet room. Leo was on the floor, his body writhing, foam frothing at the corner of his mouth. It all happened so fast, a waking nightmare in vivid detail. I shot to my feet, my limbs weak, a scream trapped in my throat. But Lillian, my daughter, my dedicated nurse, just stood there. She stared at her husband's convulsing body, then looked at me. In her eyes, there was no fear or panic. There was confusion, calculation, as if an equation had produced the wrong result and she was trying to figure out where she'd made a mistake in her calculations. And then I understood. She wasn't confused because her husband was dying. She was confused because the person dying wasn't me. Our eyes met for what felt like an eternity. In the depths of her gaze, I no longer saw the poor, lost child I had loved for 35 years. I saw only a cold abyss, a terrifying emptiness. And I knew with absolute certainty that my premonition had been right. My own daughter, the child I had raised, had tried to murder me. And her husband, Leo, a kind and innocent man, had died in my place. The only sounds in the room were the pained rasping from Leo's chest and the sickening thud of his body thrashing on the floor amidst the shards of the fated teacup. My world had shrunk to a single horrific image. The Persian rug my late husband and I had picked out on our honeymoon, now soaked with pale yellow liquid, and the spittle of my dying son-in-law. Time seemed to thicken, each second stretching into a century of torture. The initial shock had paralyzed me, my feet rooted to the floor, my mouth agape but unable to make a sound. It was Lillian's stillness that pulled me from my stupor. She remained motionless by the kitchen counter, a figure of absurd composure in a scene of utter chaos. Her gaze was no longer on me. It was fixed on Leo, but not with the eyes of a wife witnessing her husband's tragedy. it was with a cold, analytical, almost curious detachment. Her absolute lack of emotion was more terrifying than Leo's dying gasps. It was like an invisible slap, waking me from my daze. Instinct, perhaps human instinct rather than a mother's, took over. I lunged for the telephone on the small table in the corner. My trembling fingers misdialed twice before I connected with 911. Emergency! Send an ambulance! I practically screamed into the receiver, my voice raw and broken. My daughter's husband, he can't breathe. He's having a seizure. Ma'am, please calm down. What is your address? The professional voice on the other end responded. I stammered out my home address, the home where 35 years ago I had joyfully welcomed an 8-year-old child, believing I was giving her a safe harbor. The irony was suffocating. While I was trying to answer the dispatcher's questions, Lillian finally moved, but not in the way one would expect. She didn't rush to Leo's side, didn't cry out, didn't attempt first aid. She simply walked over slowly and knelt beside her husband. She didn't touch him. She just tilted her head, observing his final, weakening convulsions, her eyes narrowed, as if memorizing every detail. "They're on their way," I said, hanging up the phone. "Lillian, do something. You're a nurse." Lillian looked up at me. Her eyes were blank. "There's nothing to be done, Mom. His pupils are fully dilated. His brain is already damaged from lack of oxygen." Her voice, so chillingly calm as she analyzed her own husband's death, made the blood in my veins turn to ice. She didn't say, "My husband is dying." She said, "His brain is already damaged," as if Leo wasn't her life partner, but just a clinical case, a failed specimen. The wail of sirens grew louder, tearing through the quiet of our neighborhood. Lillian stood up, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the knee of her uniform. She walked to the front door, ready to greet the paramedics, her face already composed into a mask of appropriate concern. Within minutes, my small living room was swarming with strangers in uniform. They worked quickly and professionally, surrounding Leo's still form. I backed away, pressing myself against a bookshelf, feeling like an outsider in my own tragedy. I heard medical terms being exchanged: cardiac arrest, cyanide, scent of almonds, the scent of almonds. So I hadn't imagined it. Death had truly been served in that afternoon teapot. I watched Lillian. She was answering a paramedic's questions, her voice still steady but now laced with a controlled tremor. "Does he have any history of heart problems, ma'am?" "No, he was perfectly healthy. We just had a full physical last month." "Did he eat or drink anything before he collapsed?" I held my breath. This was it, the crucial question. I stared at my daughter, waiting for the lie. Lillian hesitated for a second, bringing a hand to her face in a perfectly calculated gesture of grief. He just had some herbal tea. I made it for my mother. But he came home and said he was thirsty, so he drank her cup." She had told the truth, but a carefully sculpted version of it, tailored to serve her purpose. In her story, she was innocent, and Leo's death was a tragic accident, a fatal mix-up. She had cleverly pointed the finger at me as the intended target, without having to accuse me directly. She was planting a seed of doubt. As they loaded Leo onto a stretcher, I saw a police officer begin to walk around the room, surveying the scene. His eyes landed on the broken teacup on the floor. He crouched down, used a pen to nudge a shard, and lifted it to his nose. His expression hardened. "We need to take you to the hospital to go through the formalities," a female paramedic said to Lillian. "And perhaps you should come too," she added, turning to me with a look of pity. I nodded mechanically. I grabbed my coat, my mind a blank. As I walked out the door, I glanced back at my living room. It was no longer a cozy refuge. It had become a crime scene. And I, by swapping the teacups, had unwittingly become the sole witness to a perfect murder plot gone wrong. At the hospital, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and silent grief. We were shown to a private family waiting room. Leo had been taken straight to the emergency room, but we all understood it was just a formality. He was already gone when he was on my living room floor. I sat on a stiff plastic chair, my hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. Lillian sat on the opposite side, a significant distance between us. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at a blank spot on the pale green wall. There were no tears. Her face was a perfect mask of shock, but her eyes were frighteningly calm. I tried to piece together the shattered fragments in my head. Lillian had meant to kill me. That tea was for me. Why? 35 years. 35 years I had loved her, sacrificed for her. I had passed up promotions at work to have more time for her. I never remarried after my husband died, afraid another man would disrupt her world. I did everything a mother could do. And this was how she repaid me? With a cup of poisoned tea? A doctor walked in, his face weary and sad. "I'm Dr. Evans. I'm so sorry to have to tell you." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lillian finally reacted. She buried her face in her hands and her shoulders began to shake. But it wasn't the gut-wrenching sob of a grieving wife. It was a dry, forced sound, as if she knew this was the moment she was supposed to cry, and she was trying to play her part. I just sat there, numb. The grief for Leo, a son-in-law I truly adored, mingled with the horror of Lillian's actions, creating a paralyzing sensation. I had no tears left to cry. The police officer from my house, Detective Miller, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, was there too. He waited for the doctor to leave before he entered. "Ma'am, miss, I'm very sorry for your loss," he said in a low, formal tone. "We need to ask a few questions." Lillian looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. I wondered how she managed that so quickly, and nodded. "Can you tell us exactly what happened?" Detective Miller asked Lillian. Lillian repeated her story, this time with even more detail and pathos. She talked about how worried she'd been about my health, how she had gone out of her way to find a special herbal tea, and how Leo, in a fateful, random moment, had drunk it by mistake. Every word was wrapped in such a convincing layer of grief that, if I hadn't been there, I might have believed her myself. "And this tea, where did you get it?" Detective Miller asked. "From a colleague at the nursing home," Lillian replied. "She said it was an old family recipe. I had no idea." She broke into sobs again. A well-prepared lie. Some anonymous colleague would become the scapegoat. Then Detective Miller turned to me. "Ma'am, is there anything you'd like to add?" The room fell silent. Lillian stopped crying and looked up at me, her red-rimmed eyes now holding a cold, warning glint. This was her test for me. She wanted to see what I would say. Would I expose her, or would I continue to play the part of a frail, shocked, and clueless old woman? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? My daughter is a murderer? Who would believe a traumatized old woman over a respected nurse grieving for her husband? They would think I was senile, paranoid, and if I was wrong, even by 1%, I would destroy my daughter's life forever. But if I was right, I was protecting a monster. "Ma'am?" Detective Miller repeated, his voice patient. I cleared my throat. "I don't know anything else. It all happened so fast. I'm in shock." I had chosen the coward's path. I had chosen silence. Lillian gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She had won this round. She knew my love for her, or at least the memory of that love, was still a chain that bound me. Detective Miller scribbled something in his notebook. "All right. We'll need to perform an autopsy and analyze the remaining tea samples at your house. Please don't leave town for the next few days." He left, leaving Lillian and me in a heavy silence. The performance was over. She wasn't crying anymore. She sat up straight again, staring at the wall. "I'll call the funeral home," she said, her voice back to its usual flat, emotionless tone. I didn't answer. I just sat there, in that cold hospital room, and felt a horrifying truth begin to form in my mind. I wasn't just dealing with a single murder attempt. I was dealing with something much darker, something that had been hidden for 35 years, and I knew that to find the truth, I couldn't rely on the police. I had to do it myself. My investigation had begun, not with physical evidence, but with a painful memory and a single question. Why? I couldn't sleep that night. My house, once a fortress of peace, now felt alien and menacing. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of the wind through a window frame made me jump. The police tape on the living room door was a throbbing scar, a physical reminder of the tragedy. I had to sleep in the guest room, unable to bear being in my own bedroom, where there were too many memories of a happy life now shattered. Lillian didn't come home with me. She said she was staying with a colleague to have some comfort, an explanation so reasonable it was beyond suspicion. But I knew better. She needed space to think, to calculate her next move after her plan had failed so catastrophically. And I needed my own space. Space to confront the terrifying reality that I had been harboring a viper in my home for 35 years. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body aching as if I'd been beaten, but my mind was strangely clear. The fear of the night had given way to a steely resolve. I could not go on living in this state of doubt and fear. I had to know the truth, the whole truth. I wouldn't sit idly by and wait for the police investigation, an investigation that could easily be sidetracked by Lillian's crocodile tears and well-rehearsed lies. I had to find the answers myself. The instincts of a librarian were deeply ingrained in me. When faced with a complex problem, I always started by gathering information, and the one place that might hold Lillian's secrets was her own home. I called Lillian. Her voice on the phone sounded tired and distraught, a perfect audio performance. "It's me, honey," I said, forcing warmth and concern into my voice, though every word made me feel sick. "I was thinking, maybe I should come over to your place and tidy up a bit, get some things ready before Leo's family arrives. You shouldn't have to worry about that right now." There was a short pause on the other end. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, analyzing my offer. Was it a trap, or just the actions of an old mother trying to be helpful? "You don't have to do that, Mom," Lillian finally replied. "I can manage." "No, I want to do something," I insisted. "Sitting here alone just makes my mind wander. I'll come over, organize Leo's room, maybe pack a few sets of clothes for you. Where do you keep the spare key? Still under the geranium pot on the porch?" I deliberately mentioned the spare key, a small detail of familiarity to put her off her guard. Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, it's still there," Lillian said, her voice slightly reluctant. "But please don't overdo it." "Thank you, Mom." "Of course not, dear. You just rest." I hung up, my heart pounding. She had agreed. Either she was so confident I wouldn't find anything, or she had no choice but to accept without raising suspicion. Either way, I had my chance. Lillian and Leo's apartment was on the top floor of an old, subdivided Victorian house, just a 15-minute walk from my home. As I slid the key into the lock, a pang of guilt pricked me. I was invading my own daughter's privacy. But then the image of Leo convulsing on my floor flashed in my mind, and the guilt vanished, replaced by sheer determination. Inside, the apartment was perfectly tidy, an orderly coldness that reflected Lillian's personality. Not a speck of dust on the furniture, the books on the shelf arranged alphabetically, the pillows on the sofa fluffed just so. It looked more like a showroom than a place where people actually lived. This cleanliness no longer impressed me. It unnerved me. It was the cleanliness of a surgical theater where terrible things could happen without leaving a trace. Where should I start? The medicine cabinet? The bedside table drawer? Those were too obvious. Lillian was smart and careful. If she had something to hide, she wouldn't leave it in such easy-to-find places. My librarian's instinct kicked in again. Go to the source of knowledge, the place where stories are hidden, the bookshelf. I stood before the large bookshelf in the living room. There were novels, Leo's history books, and a section dedicated to Lillian's medical textbooks. I ran my fingers along the perfectly aligned spines. What was I looking for? A diary? No, Lillian wasn't the diary type. She was too private, too controlled. I decided to check each book, one by one. It was tedious work, but it was the only way. I pulled out a book, flipped through the pages quickly, checked for anything tucked inside, then placed it back in its exact spot. Book after book, romance novels, books on world history, thick medical manuals. Nothing. I was about to give up when I reached the bottom shelf, where the older, less used books were kept. One book looked out of place. It was an old pharmacology handbook, its spine frayed and its pages yellowed with age. It wasn't the kind of book a modern nurse would use for reference. I pulled it out. It was unusually heavy. When I opened the cover, I noticed something was wrong. The back cover was thicker than it should be. I used my fingernail to pry at the edge of the end paper. It came loose. Underneath, A section had been hollowed out of the pages, creating a secret compartment, and inside that compartment was a small, black, leather-bound notebook, the kind people use for work notes. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had found it. I sat down in a nearby armchair, my hands trembling as I opened the notebook. Inside were not emotional diary entries. They were pages of cold, meticulous notes in a tiny, neat, and shockingly precise handwriting. Lillian's handwriting. Each page was dated and bore a patient's name. They were all familiar names. Elderly people I knew had passed away at Green Pastures over the last few years. Under each name was a hand-drawn chart tracking the decline of their vital signs: heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. Beside it were notes on symptoms: confusion, loss of appetite, lethargy, and then, at the end of each entry, was a line that made my skin crawl: final dosage, followed by the name of a drug, usually a powerful sedative or painkiller like morphine, and the exact dosage. Next to that, in a separate column, was the time and date. And finally, concluding each tragic entry, was a chilling circled symbol, a plus sign, plus. Next to the date, the patient was officially pronounced dead. And beside the plus sign, there were always two initials written in a different ink, as if added later: A.P. A.P. Approved. I turned page after page, a wave of nausea rising in my stomach. Margaret Thompson, Arthur Jennings, Helen Carter, all my friends, people I had visited, people Lillian had told me had passed away peacefully in their sleep. Peaceful. A peace calculated in milligrams, recorded in a death ledger. My daughter wasn't a compassionate nurse. She was an angel of death. But why? Out of some misguided compassion? To end their suffering? No. The cold, clinical detail in these notes showed no emotion. This wasn't mercy. This was a procedure, a system. And who was AP? A colleague? A doctor? The approved notation suggested Lillian wasn't acting alone. There was someone else, someone with more authority, who was directing or at least condoning these actions. I closed the notebook, feeling as if I were holding a cursed object. What was I to do with it? Take it to the police? Would Detective Miller believe me? Or would he think that I, in my grief and confusion, had fabricated this evidence to frame my daughter? This notebook, as horrifying as it was, still had no direct link to Leo's death. No, it was too soon. I needed more information. I needed to know who AP was. I carefully placed the notebook back inside the hollowed-out book, resealed the end paper as best I could, and returned the book to its original spot on the shelf. I couldn't let Lillian know I had found it. My safety now depended on her believing I was still a frail, pitiful, and completely ignorant old mother. I continued my cleaning, mechanically, my mind reeling from my discovery. I sorted Leo's clothes, folding them neatly, feeling as if I were performing a final ritual for my poor, lost son-in-law. In the pocket of his jacket, I found his wallet. Inside, besides cash and credit cards, was a small photograph. It was a picture of him and Lillian on their wedding day. They looked so happy. Lillian was smiling. A rare, radiant smile I seldom saw. Looking at that smile, I wondered, was it real? Or was it just another part of a 35-year-long performance? I left the apartment as the afternoon sun began to fade, my heart heavy. I had gone there hoping to find an answer, and I had found one, but that answer had opened up 100 more questions, each more terrifying than the last. Lillian hadn't just tried to kill me. She was a serial killer, and she wasn't acting alone. As I walked home, passing by the town library where I had dedicated my life, an idea sparked. The library, the place that held all kinds of information, a place where I could search without anyone noticing. I knew what I had to do next. My investigation would move from Lillian's home to the town's archives. I would find out who A.P. was, and I would find out why my daughter had become a monster. The book of Lillian's life still had many dark chapters I hadn't read, and I was going to read them, no matter how painful the truth might be. The following days were a blur of funeral arrangements and empty condolences. I played the part of a grieving mother and mother-in-law to perfection. I stood by Lillian's side at the funeral home, holding her hand as she accepted sympathetic hugs from friends and neighbors. I listened as she retold the story of the tragic accident over and over, each telling more sorrowful and believable than the last. I had become an unwilling actress in my daughter's horrific play, and each of her lies was like a knife twisting in my gut. But beneath that fragile, grieving exterior, my mind was working non-stop, sharp as a razor. The black notebook was a constant presence in my thoughts, the names, the drugs, and those two mysterious initials, A.P. I knew that discovering A.P.'s identity was the key to unlocking this entire nightmare. Leo's funeral was held on a gray, drizzly Tuesday morning. As I stood by the freshly dug grave, listening to the first clumps of dirt hit the casket, I didn't cry. My grief was beyond tears. It had hardened into something colder and stronger, a quiet rage and a resolve to get justice for all the victims, including Leo and myself. After the funeral, Lillian announced she was taking a few weeks off work to get her head straight. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. With Lillian at home, I could go to the library without fear of being discovered. The Stockbridge Town Library was my second home. Even though I was retired, I still had my access card and a key to the archives, a privilege for long-serving employees. Martha, my successor, was a kind but slightly absent-minded woman who would never question my presence. To everyone else, I was just old Diane, seeking solace among familiar books after the shock of losing her son-in-law. No one could have suspected I was conducting an investigation into a serial killer. I started my work in the microfilm room, which housed the old editions of the local paper, the Stockbridge Chronicle. I needed a plausible excuse if anyone asked. I decided I was researching the history of the town's founding families, a topic boring enough that no one would want to know more. My task was simple, but time-consuming. I took out the list of names from Lillian's black notebook. One by one, I looked up their obituaries. Margaret Thompson, Arthur Jennings, Helen Carter, and a dozen others. Their obituaries all shared a few alarming commonalities. First, they were all described as having passed away peacefully at Green Pastures Nursing Home after a long illness. A standard phrase, but when read in succession, it began to take on a sinister tone. Second, and more importantly, in the family information section, many of them were listed as having no surviving relatives or only distant relations. They were lonely people whose passing wouldn't raise too many questions, who had no children or grandchildren who might demand a detailed autopsy. They were the perfect victims. Third, and this was the detail that sent a chill down my spine, at the end of each obituary, there was always a line. In lieu of flowers, the family requests that donations be made to the Price Foundation for Elder Health. The Price Foundation. The name rang like a death knell in my head. I immediately moved to the library's computer and accessed the public database of nonprofit organizations. It only took a few minutes to find what I needed. The Price Foundation for Elder Health was established 10 years ago. The founder and chairman of the board was none other than Dr. Alistair Price. And his current position? Director of Green Pastures Nursing Home. A.P. Those two letters now appeared before my eyes as if written in fire. Alistair Price. It was him. The one behind Lillian, the one who approved the deaths. A shiver ran down my spine. I had found the mastermind, but what was the motive? Why would a nursing home director, a doctor, run an organized murder scheme? The answer was right there in the name of the charity: money. I dug deeper. Using the online research tools I had mastered over the years, I began to look into the public financial records of the Price Foundation and the property records of the victims. What I discovered painted a picture of a scheme so greedy and ruthless it was almost unimaginable. Their system worked like this. Lillian, as the primary care nurse, would identify the targets. They were elderly, wealthy patients, but lonely, with no direct heirs. Then, under Price's direction, she would begin the process of special care, slowly deteriorating their health with hard-to-detect medications, causing symptoms like confusion and weakness that could easily be mistaken for old age. During this phase, Dr. Price, as the respected director and physician, would approach the victims. He would play the part of a friend, a confidant, the only one who truly cared for them in their final days. He would suggest they leave a meaningful legacy and introduce them to a lawyer. This lawyer, of course, was part of the conspiracy and would help the victims rewrite their wills, leaving their entire estates, houses, stocks, savings to the Price Foundation. Once the new will was signed and notarized, Lillian would get the approval from AP. She would administer the final dosage. The death would be ruled natural. The will would be executed. And hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars, would flow into Price's foundation, a foundation which, upon closer inspection, I found spent only a tiny fraction on actual charitable work. The majority was used to pay a handsome salary to its director, Price, alone, and invested in shell companies that he controlled. Lillian wasn't an angel of mercy. She was an executioner, an efficient tool in a machine that monetized death, a machine run by someone even more ruthless and intelligent than she was. I sat stunned in front of the computer screen, its blue light illuminating my face. The truth was worse than anything I had imagined. This wasn't the act of a single deranged individual. This was a criminal enterprise, perfectly disguised under a cloak of philanthropy. But there was still one big question unanswered: the connection between Price and Lillian. How could a respected doctor trust and collaborate with a nurse on such a horrific conspiracy? Where did their relationship begin? Why was Lillian so loyal to him that she was willing to kill, even try to kill her own adoptive mother? The answer certainly wasn't in financial records or obituaries. It had to be somewhere deeper, in the past, in the pages of a file I had sealed away 35 years ago. I shut down the computer, feeling as exhausted as if I had just run a marathon. I knew the what and the how. Now I needed to find the why. On my way home, I passed by Green Pastures Nursing Home. It was an imposing red brick building set on a hill with meticulously manicured lawns. It looked so peaceful, a picture of care and tranquility. But now, looking at it, I saw only a house of horrors, a mausoleum built on greed and betrayal. I looked up at the windows, wondering how many frail, elderly people were inside, unaware that their esteemed director was waiting for them to sign their own death warrants. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room in the dark, with only the streetlights casting shadows through the window. I was up against an enemy who was not only ruthless, but also incredibly powerful and influential in our town, Dr. Alistair Price. He was on the town council, a major donor to the local hospital, a pillar of the community. If I brought my fragmented evidence to Detective Miller, would he dare to confront a man like Price? Or would he dismiss it as the paranoid ramblings of a grieving old woman? I was alone in this fight, and I knew that to take down this two-headed monster, I needed an undeniable weapon. I needed to find the root of the connection between Price and Lillian, a truth that could blow their whole facade apart, and I knew exactly where to find it. In the old, dusty metal box stored in my attic, the box that held everything I knew about Lillian's past, or at least everything I had been allowed to know. It was time to open Pandora's box. My attic had always been a forgotten world, a land of the past covered in dust and cobwebs. It was where I stored the fragments of a life gone by, the old crib of the son I lost in infancy, an outdated wedding dress, boxes of my husband's letters from his time in the service, and, of course, the gray metal box that held the beginning of my relationship with Lillian. For 35 years, I had rarely come up here. Confronting the ghosts of the past was always too much to bear. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't running from the past. I needed it. I needed it to understand my monstrous present. With a flashlight in hand, I pulled down the folding ladder and slowly climbed into the attic. The air was thick and musty, smelling of old wood, aging paper, and mothballs. The beam of my flashlight swept across objects draped in white sheets, making them look like tombstones in a forgotten crypt. I found the metal box in a dark corner, behind an old trunk. It felt cold and heavy in my hands. I brought it down to the living room and placed it on the coffee table. For a moment, I just sat and looked at it, my fingers tracing the rust spots on the lid. This box had once symbolized a new beginning, a hope. The day I brought it home from the social services office, I believed I was bringing home a chance to heal a broken soul, and in turn, to heal my own widowed heart. How wrong I had been. I flicked open the time-stiffened latch. The lid popped open with a dry click. Inside was a thick file, the papers yellowed to a creamy color over the years. Adoption file, Lillian, last name unknown, case hash 734B. I carefully lifted the file out, the smell of old paper hitting my nose, a scent I once loved, but which now filled me with dread. I began to read, turning the first few pages slowly. They were documents I was familiar with: Lillian's health certificate, preliminary psychological evaluations, legal papers terminating parental rights, unidentified, and finally, the court decree granting me custody. Everything was in order. The psychological reports described Lillian as introverted, non-communicative, and exhibiting signs of severe trauma. The cause, as stated in the file, was orphaned due to a tragic house fire that claimed the lives of both parents. This was the story I had been told by the social worker, and it had seared itself onto my heart, becoming the foundation for 35 years of my love and compensation. I had always pictured a little girl witnessing that horror, a horror that shaped her quiet, withdrawn personality. But as I read more closely, I started to see cracks in that perfect narrative. There were inconsistencies. One report stated Lillian was found at the scene of the fire, but another said she was brought to the police station the next day by a neighbor. Her age wasn't consistent. One document listed her as 8, another as nearly 9. These were small discrepancies, clerical errors that 35 years ago, in my eagerness to become a mother, I had completely overlooked. But now, with the eyes of someone searching for the truth, they became glaringly suspicious. I delved deeper into the file, into the section of internal memos and correspondence between social workers, documents I was never supposed to see. And that's when I found it. Tucked into the back cover of the file, almost completely hidden, was a flimsy blue carbon copy of a report, the kind used for duplicates before the age of photocopiers. It was a copy of an initial report, one that had apparently been removed from the official file. The handwriting was different, not that of the social worker I had dealt with. It was messy, rushed, as if written in a state of agitation, and its contents made my entire world collapse for the second time in a week. The report was dated the 15th of April, 1983. Author, Sarah Jenkins, intern caseworker. Subject, case of female child, identifies as Lillian, found at Greyhound bus station. Subject approx. 8 to 9 years old, was discovered sitting alone at the bus station at 5 a.m. by security. When questioned, subject stated her parents fell asleep in a fire at their home in rural Berkshire County. Subject could not or would not provide a precise address. Showed no signs of emotion, no crying, no panic. Answered questions with unusual intelligence and articulation for her age. Tended to observe and analyze the reactions of others. Preliminary check shows no signs of physical abuse. However, subject's demeanor and narrative are extremely disturbing. Subject described the fire in graphic, almost enthusiastic detail, specifically mentioning the smell of burning meat, like a pork roast. I have reported my concerns to my supervisor. However, Deputy Director Alistair Price of the Berkshire County Child Protective Services has personally taken over the case. Mr. Price instructed me not to include the details of the subject's demeanor in the official file. He stated it was a normal reaction for a severely traumatized child and ordered the incident to be recorded as trauma due to loss of family in house fire. He personally redrafted the main report and asked for my signature. I refused. Mr. Price then handled the file himself and had me transferred to administrative duties. Personal note, I do not believe this subject is a victim of the fire. I believe the subject was directly involved, and I believe Deputy Director Price is covering up something extremely serious. I will be submitting my resignation at the end of this week. I cannot work in a system like this. I had to read the report 3 times, the words swimming before my eyes. My breath came in ragged gasps. Alistair Price. The name surfaced again, not as a nursing home director, but as a deputy director of a child protective agency from 35 years ago. He had been there from the very beginning. He wasn't just the mastermind of the nursing home murders, he was the architect of Lillian's entire fraudulent life. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. a truth so monstrous it was almost impossible to believe. Lillian was not the victim of a fire, she was the one who started it. The daughter I had loved, the child I had tried to heal from her trauma, was a murderer since she was 8 years old. And Alistair Price knew. He didn't just know, he actively concealed it. He twisted the truth, created a fake sob story, and turned a child monster into a pitiable orphan ready for adoption. Why? Why would a social services official do something so horrific? What was in it for him? And then I understood. Price didn't see a problem child. He saw potential. He recognized Lillian for what she was: intelligent, cold, emotionless, manipulative. He saw a perfect tool. He hadn't saved Lillian. He had recruited her. He had put her away, protected her under a safe cover, waiting for the right time to use her again for his own dark purposes. And my family, my love, my home, it was all just an incubator, a safe place for his monster to grow up and wait. The nausea rose in my throat again. My entire life as a mother had been a farce. I wasn't Lillian's mother. I was her keeper, an unwitting guardian for a living weapon. I sat there, numb, amidst the papers, feeling hollowed out and betrayed beyond measure. My love had not healed Lillian. It had simply nurtured her, given her a perfect cover story, an unassailable background so she could continue her crimes as an adult. I had been an unknowing accomplice to evil. The report from that young social worker, Sarah Jenkins, was the proof I needed. This was the undeniable link between Price and Lillian. It not only proved their current crimes, but exposed the root of their evil from the very beginning. But it also put me in even greater danger. Now, I didn't just know about the nursing home murders. I knew about a crime that had been covered up for 35 years, a crime Alistair Price had gone to great lengths to bury. If he found out that I knew this, he would not hesitate to silence me. That poison tea wasn't just a plan to get my insurance money. It was an act to eliminate a potential witness. Perhaps I had unknowingly said or done something that made them feel threatened. I carefully placed the carbon copy back in the file, returned the metal box to the attic, moving like a robot. My mind was now perfectly clear. No more grief, no more shock, just a cold clarity. I knew what I had to do. I could no longer confront them alone. It was time to bring this truth into the light. But I couldn't just go blindly to Detective Miller. I needed a plan. I needed a way to present this story so that no one could dismiss it. I needed an ally, and I knew exactly who that was. Someone who, like me, believed in the power of the truth written in black and white. Someone who wasn't afraid to take on powerful people. Someone who owed me a favor. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. The Boston Globe. How can I help you? Frank Gable, please, I said, my voice now steady and resolute. Tell him it's Diane Whitfield from Stockbridge. It's about a story much bigger than the library embezzlement scandal he helped me quash 10 years ago. Frank Gable was a veteran investigative journalist, and I was about to give him the story of a lifetime. Frank Gable arrived in Stockbridge on a weekend when the first winds of winter began to blow, carrying the biting chill of New England. He didn't look like the stereotypical hard-nosed investigative reporter from the movies, no rumpled trench coat or world-weary cynicism. Frank, in his late 50s, looked more like a college professor, with salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, horn-rimmed glasses, and a calm, thoughtful demeanor. But behind those glasses were sharp eyes that missed nothing. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place discreet enough to go unnoticed. I had chosen a corner table, and when Frank walked in, he recognized me immediately, even though it had been 10 years. "Diane," he said, extending a hand with a warm smile. "You haven't changed a bit, still have that librarian's calm of someone who's read every book in existence." "Hello, Frank," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for coming. I know you're a busy man. When you said the story was bigger than the library fund embezzlement, you piqued my curiosity," he said, sitting down and ordering a black coffee. "So, what could possibly be happening in this peaceful little town to make a Globe reporter drive 2 hours in the rain?" I took a deep breath. Recounting this whole story to an outsider wasn't easy. It felt like admitting my entire life had been a failure. But looking into Frank's patient and understanding eyes, I knew I had chosen the right person. I began to talk. I told him about the afternoon tea, about Leo's death, about Lillian's cold detachment. I told him about the black notebook, the scheduled deaths at Green Pastures, the Price Foundation, and the ruthless financial scheme. And finally, my voice trembling, I told him what I had found in the attic, the buried report from the social worker Sarah Jenkins, the fire, and Alistair Price's role from 35 years ago. For nearly an hour, Frank didn't interrupt me once. He just sat there, listening intently, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. His initial relaxed expression slowly hardened into one of intense focus, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. When I finished, a long silence hung in the cafe, filled only by the sound of the coffee grinder and the rain pattering against the window pane. "My God," Frank finally said, his voice low. "Diane, if even half of what you're saying is true, this isn't a story, this is a monster." "It's all true, Frank," I asserted. "I can show you a photo of the report." I took one with my phone. "I believe you," he said, and a great sense of relief washed over me. "The question now is, what do we do with it? Alistair Price is no small fry. He's protected by the community. Going to the local police now would be suicide. He could easily turn you from a witness into a paranoid, grieving old woman trying to frame her innocent daughter. That's why I called you," I said. "I need a plan. The police need undeniable proof. We need something that connects Price to Lillian directly, not just in the past, but right now." Frank nodded, tapping his fingers on the table. "You said Lillian received a Young Medical Volunteer of the Year award about 15 years ago, and Price presented it. That could have been when they reconnected. It's a good lead. But how do we prove their relationship is more than just director and employee?" I asked. "We need to find out how they communicate outside of work. Emails, phone calls, secret meetings," Frank mused. "But more importantly, we need proof of the current crimes. The black notebook is a horrific find, but his lawyers could argue it's a forgery or the ramblings of a disturbed mind. We need something more solid, a confession." "How can we possibly get that?" I asked, feeling a sliver of despair. "They're too smart, too careful." "The smartest ones are often the most arrogant," Frank said, a glint in his eye. "Price thinks he's untouchable. Lillian thinks she's protected. Maybe we can use that arrogance against them." And so, right there at that small cafe table, amid the aroma of roasted coffee beans and the sound of falling rain, a plan began to take shape. A plan that was bold, dangerous, and required me to give the performance of a lifetime. Our plan was two-pronged. Frank, with the resources of a major newspaper, would start his own secret investigation. He would track down Sarah Jenkins, the social worker who wrote that report all those years ago. If she was still alive and willing to testify, it would be a powerful blow. Frank would also use his contacts to dig deeper into the finances of the Price Foundation and his shell companies. Meanwhile, my part was the real high-stakes game. I had to approach the enemy. I had to become the bait to trap the hunters. "Diane, can you do this?" Frank asked me, his voice filled with concern. "This is incredibly dangerous." "I've been living in danger for 35 years without even knowing it," I replied, my voice steady. "At least now I know what I'm up against." The first step of my plan took place a few days later. I called Lillian, my voice filled with worry and exhaustion. "Lillian, it's me. I'm not doing well. I keep thinking about Leo, and about that teacup. The police asked me some more questions, and I'm afraid they suspect something. I'm so scared, honey." I was planting a seed of fear and instability. I wanted Lillian to feel that her protective wall was beginning to crack. "What did they ask you?" Lillian's voice on the other end became wary. "They asked about the tea, about the colleague who gave it to you. I told them I didn't know anything, but they kept looking at me funny. Lillian, I think I need a lawyer." This was the lure. I knew that at the mention of the word lawyer, Lillian wouldn't act on her own. She would have to report back to her master. "As I expected," Lillian said. "Don't worry too much, Mom. You didn't do anything wrong. Let me see what I can do. Don't talk to anyone else, not even the police." The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Attorney Peterson. I hear you're in need of some legal advice." His voice was smooth and confident. I knew without a doubt this was Price's lawyer, the same one who helped the victims rewrite their wills. The trap was working. The second step was even riskier. I had to approach Alistair Price directly. I called his office at Green Pastures, playing the part of a frail, grieving, and worried old woman concerned about her future. "Dr. Price," I said in a trembling voice, "this is Diane Whitfield, Lillian's mother. I'm sorry to bother you, but after my son-in-law's passing, I've been feeling so lonely and anxious. Lillian says you're a very kind man and that your nursing home is a wonderful place. I'd like to come for a tour and maybe learn about moving in. I also wanted to talk about drawing up a new will to make sure my assets are used for a meaningful purpose." I had thrown out the juiciest bait: a potential client, a wealthy donor, and the mother of his most valuable asset. He couldn't possibly refuse. "Oh, Mrs. Whitfield." Price's voice came over the phone, warm and full of fake sympathy. "I'm so very sorry for your loss. Lillian is a wonderful employee, and we were all heartbroken for her. Of course, I would be delighted to meet with you. Could you come to my office at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon? We can talk privately." The appointment was set. The endgame was about to begin. Frank and I prepared meticulously for this meeting. He gave me a small brooch designed to look like a simple piece of antique jewelry, but hidden inside was a tiny, high-fidelity audio recorder. "You don't have to get him to confess to everything," Frank instructed me. "Our goal is to record anything that proves a close, unusual relationship between him and Lillian. Any statement that shows he knows more than a director should. Any word that shows he's trying to manipulate you. We just need one thing, Diane. One sentence to crack the door open." On Friday, I wore my best dress and pinned the recorder to my lapel. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I no longer recognized the woman staring back. The gentle, submissive look was gone. In its place were sharp eyes and a cold calm. I was no longer a retired librarian. I was a spy on the most important and final mission of my life. As I drove to Green Pastures, I remembered the photo I had found in the album, the one of Price with his hand on Lillian's shoulder 15 years ago. Their reunion, the moment the monster reconnected with her creator. And today, I would have my own reunion with him. Dr. Alistair Price's office was nothing like that of a typical nursing home director. It looked more like the office of an investment bank CEO. It was a spacious corner office with large windows overlooking the lush Berkshire Valley. The furniture was polished mahogany, the massive desk was impeccably organized, and expensive contemporary art hung on the walls. Everything exuded power, wealth, and refined taste. It was a space designed to impress and to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Alistair Price rose from behind his desk as I entered. He was tall and slender in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back elegantly. In his 60s, he still had a charismatic presence, with intelligent blue eyes and a practiced smile that managed to be both warm and authoritatively distant. He was the very picture of success and trustworthiness. But when I looked into those eyes, I saw no sympathy. I saw only the cold calculation of a shark that had scented its prey. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, his voice as smooth and rich as a broadcaster's. He walked around the desk, extending his hand. "It's an honor to have you. Please, have a seat." His handshake was firm but cold. I sat down in the leather visitor's chair, feeling it try to swallow me. The brooch on my lapel felt heavy, a tangible reminder of my mission. "Thank you for seeing me, doctor," I began, pitching my voice to have a slight tremble of age and anxiety. "I know you're very busy." "Not at all, my dear. Anything for Lillian's mother," he said, taking the seat opposite me, leaning forward attentively. "Lillian is one of our most dedicated staff members. We all consider her family here. The loss she and you are enduring is just terrible." "Yes, terrible," I echoed, lowering my head to pretend to wipe away a non-existent tear. "That's partly why I'm here, doctor. Lillian, she's all I have. After Leo's sudden death, I've realized I can't live alone forever. I need a place that's safe, a place with care." "You've come to the right place, Diane," he said, seamlessly switching to my first name. "Green Pastures isn't just a facility, we're a community. And with Lillian working here, you'll always have family by your side." He was casting his net, his words as sweet as poisoned honey. I had to be careful. "I've heard so many good things," I said. "But, doctor, there's something else on my mind, something more delicate." "Please, speak freely," Price encouraged, his blue eyes lighting up with curiosity. "It's about my estate," I continued, looking him straight in the eye. "I don't have much, but it's my and my late husband's life's work. I have the house, a small investment portfolio worth about $2 million, and a life insurance policy for about the same amount." I deliberately stated the exact figures. I wanted to see his reaction, and I did. An almost imperceptible flicker in his eyes, a sudden interest perfectly masked by his sympathetic facade. He had taken the bait. "I don't want Lillian to be burdened with it all. She's suffered so much already," I went on, my voice thick with emotion. "I want to make sure the money is used wisely, to leave a meaningful legacy. Lillian mentioned your foundation. The Price Foundation is our pride and joy," he interjected, his enthusiasm palpable. "We fund research into Alzheimer's, support meals for homebound seniors. Your legacy would be used to help thousands of people, Diane." "I thought so," I nodded. "But the police? They're still investigating Leo's death. They've been asking me so many questions. I've hired a lawyer on a friend's advice." Price's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. "A lawyer? Why on earth? It was clearly a tragic accident." "I think so too. But they keep asking about the tea. They want to know which colleague gave it to Lillian. Lillian says she can't remember the name, and that's making them suspicious. I'm afraid they might make trouble for her." I had pushed the ball into his court. I was forcing him to react, to reveal his special connection to Lillian. Price was silent for a few seconds, his long fingers steepled on the desk. He was assessing the situation. "Diane," he finally said, his voice becoming more intimate, almost conspiratorial. "You don't need to worry about the police, and you certainly don't need a lawyer. That's an unnecessary waste of money. Lillian can be a bit forgetful under stress, but I know her well. She wouldn't hurt a fly. I'll speak to our facility's attorney. He'll make sure the police stop bothering you and your daughter." There it was, the line Frank and I had been waiting for. "I know her well. I'll speak to our attorney." He didn't say, "We will support our employee." He said, "I." He was positioning himself as her protector, the one in control, a role far beyond that of a typical director. My little brooch was recording it all, but I needed more. I had to push him further. "My house. The police took all the leftover tea," I lied. "But I still have the paper bag. Lillian brought it in. I don't know if I should give it to them." Price's eyes narrowed. "You still have the bag?" "Yes, it's in my kitchen drawer." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at me. I could feel him weighing his options. He didn't know I was lying, and the existence of a piece of physical evidence he couldn't control was making him nervous. "Diane," he said, his voice now almost a whisper, "you're an intelligent woman. You understand that sometimes it's best to let things go, for everyone's sake, especially for Lillian's. She had a very difficult childhood. She deserves to have some peace." He was subtly threatening me. He was referencing Lillian's past, a past he had fabricated, and implying that he had the power to either protect her or destroy her. "Her childhood," I repeated, feigning confusion. "That fire, it was so awful." Price smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, a true tragedy. But it's tragedies like that which forged the strong woman Lillian is today. I've watched over her since the first day I met her at the Children's Center. I saw a special spark in her, an extraordinary will to survive. Some people are just born survivors, Diane." A veiled confession. He had just admitted his connection to Lillian from 35 years ago. He was boasting about his ability to spot talent, about discovering her gift. His arrogance was making him sloppy. "So, what should I do with the bag, doctor?" I asked innocently. "I think," Price said, standing and walking to the window to look out, "that some things just get misplaced sometimes. A bit of spring cleaning, perhaps, to get rid of painful memories." It was a clear instruction. Destroy the evidence. He had just committed a serious crime, tampering with a witness and obstruction of justice. I stood up as well. I had everything I needed. The tiny recorder had done its job perfectly. "Thank you, doctor. You've put my mind at ease," I said, my voice full of gratitude. "I'll give serious thought to moving here into my will." "I'm so glad to hear that, Diane," he said, turning back to smile at me, the smile of a wolf who was sure the sheep had walked right into its trap. "Call me anytime." I left Price's office and walked through the luxurious corridors of green pastures. I passed elderly patients in wheelchairs and busy nurses. Everything looked so normal, but I knew that behind this peaceful facade was a functioning killing machine. It wasn't until I was back in my car and driving off the property that I allowed myself to exhale. My hands, gripping the steering wheel, were shaking uncontrollably. I had faced the devil and walked away in one piece. I drove straight to the cafe where Frank was waiting. I said nothing, just unpinned the brooch and placed it on the table. He plugged it into a small device connected to his laptop and put on a pair of headphones. I watched his face as he listened to the recording. I saw concentration, then a frown, and finally, a fleeting, triumphant smile. He took off the headphones. "Diane," he said, his voice full of admiration, "you're not just a librarian, you're a hell of an actress." "Do we have enough?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "We don't just have enough," Frank said, closing his laptop. "We have a bomb, and it's time to light the fuse." The bomb Frank spoke of didn't detonate immediately. Instead, its timer was carefully set, waiting for the perfect moment to create maximum impact. Frank was a master strategist. He knew that simply handing the recording to the local police was too risky. Alistair Price had too much influence in town. He could easily make a few calls and squash the investigation before it even started. We needed an outside force, one that Price couldn't control. Frank spent the next 2 days working almost without sleep. He sent the recording to an audio expert for authentication and cleanup. He drafted a detailed report, weaving all the evidence together: the victims' obituaries, the Price Foundation's financial records, Sarah Jenkins' buried report Frank had found her, now an elderly woman living in Arizona and more than willing to testify, and finally, the full transcript of my conversation with Price. The entire 35-year criminal history was packaged into one thick file. Instead of going to Detective Miller, Frank contacted the district attorney's office directly, as well as a special state police unit that investigated elder fraud and cold cases. He sent them the entire package, along with a note stating that the Boston Globe would be publishing a full exposé in 48 hours. It was a brilliant move, creating immense pressure for the authorities to act swiftly and decisively. They couldn't ignore a scandal that was about to break in one of the country's major newspapers. While Frank prepared the assault from the outside, I had one last role to play. I had to keep Price and Lillian completely off guard. I called Price the next day, my voice full of gratitude and a touch of naivety. "Doctor, I just wanted to call and thank you again. I thought long and hard about your advice. That paper bag, I put it in the fireplace last night. It felt so good to get rid of a bad memory." "You did the right thing, Diane." Price's voice on the other end was full of satisfaction. "It's the best way to move forward." "And about the will," I continued, "Attorney Peterson has been in touch. I think I'm ready to proceed. Perhaps we could meet next week to finalize everything?" "Wonderful. I look forward to it," he replied, the greed in his voice barely concealed. Next, I called Lillian. I told her about my meeting with Price, how he had put my mind at ease, and that I had decided to move into green pastures. "You see, Mom," Lillian said, her voice audibly relieved. "I told you Dr. Price would take care of everything. He always knows what's best." The words of a true believer, I thought. She was either completely manipulated, or perhaps she had simply found a master worthy of her own nature. D-Day was set for Wednesday. Frank informed me that the state police would execute the arrests in the afternoon. His article would be published online immediately after. That Wednesday morning, I woke with a strange feeling, a mixture of fear and liberation. My decades-long nightmare was about to end. I went about my daily routine mechanically, making tea, reading, tending to my garden. But my mind was elsewhere. It was at green pastures, waiting for the trap to spring. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got a call from Lillian. For the first time, I heard real panic in her voice. "Mom, Are you watching the news? The police! There are so many police here, at Green Pastures. They're locking the whole place down." "What? What's going on, dear?" I asked, forcing shock and surprise into my voice. "I don't know. They won't let anyone in or out. They said they have a search warrant." "Mom, I'm scared." "Stay calm, sweetheart. It must be some kind of misunderstanding," I said, while my own heart pounded with adrenaline. "I'll head over there right now." Of course, I didn't go. I sat in my living room, turned on the local news channel, and then I saw it. The first images from a news helicopter. State police cruisers with flashing lights surrounding the imposing red brick building of Green Pastures. Reporters were gathering outside, trying to figure out what was happening. Frank called me. "It started, Diane," he said, his voice electric with excitement. "They're searching Price's office and Lillian's workstation. The arrest warrants have been signed." I sat glued to the television. About half an hour later, the cameras caught the moment. The main doors of the nursing home opened. Alistair Price emerged, but not with his usual elegant, powerful air. He was flanked by 2 large state troopers, his hands cuffed behind his back. His suit was rumpled, his silver hair a mess. When he looked up and saw the forest of cameras pointed at him, his face contorted from shock to pure rage. His perfect mask had shattered. A few minutes later, they brought Lillian out. She looked small and frail in her nurse's uniform. Unlike Price, she showed no anger. Her face was a blank canvas, her eyes staring into the distance, as if this were happening to someone else. Even in her downfall, she maintained that terrifying calm. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. Frank had sent me a link. His article was live. The headline blazed across the homepage of the Boston Globe: "Angels of Death, Murder and Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Ring Uncovered at Prestigious Nursing Home." The article laid it all bare. The financial conspiracy, the suspicious deaths, the black notebook, Price's role from 35 years ago, and the transcript of my conversation with him. Frank had skillfully protected my identity, referring to me only as a courageous mother who risked everything to expose the truth. My phone began to ring incessantly. Neighbors, friends, everyone was calling, shocked and disbelieving. The quiet town of Stockbridge had become the epicenter of a national scandal. That evening, the district attorney held a press conference. He announced the arrests of Dr. Alistair Price and Nurse Lillian Whitfield on multiple charges: first-degree murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. He praised the months-long undercover investigation by the state police and the bravery of the witnesses who came forward. I watched it alone in the dark, holding a cup of cold tea. I didn't feel joy or triumph. I just felt an immense emptiness. The war was over, and I had won. But the cost was too high. I had lost the son-in-law I adored, and I had lost the illusion of a daughter I had loved for 35 years. The next day, Detective Miller, the local officer, came to my house. His face was a mask of embarrassment and regret. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, unable to look me in the eye. I came to apologize. We put too much faith in Price's reputation. We didn't listen to our own initial doubts. If it hadn't been for you and that newspaper—" "It's all right, Detective," I cut him off. "You couldn't have known. Nobody could have." "We'll need you to give a formal statement," he said, "and probably testify at the trial." "I'm ready," I replied without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they can never hurt anyone again." Before he left, Detective Miller hesitated. "There's one more thing, ma'am. When we questioned Lillian, she barely said a word, just kept repeating one sentence." "What was that?" I asked. "Ask Dr. Price. He always knows what's best." I nodded wearily. Even with the trap sprung, the puppet remained loyal to its master. Or perhaps she was playing one last game, trying to drag her creator down into the abyss with her. Either way, their story was now in the hands of the justice system. The trial of Alistair Price and Lillian Whitfield began 6 months later and became a national media event. The Berkshire County Superior Courthouse was packed with reporters, victims' families, and curious residents of Stockbridge, who were still reeling from the knowledge that they had lived alongside monsters for so many years. I was there every day, sitting in the front row reserved for witnesses. It was a painful duty, forcing me to face the two people who had destroyed my life on a daily basis. Price, in his expensive suits and flanked by a high-powered legal team, tried to maintain an air of calm confidence, but the strain showed in the lines around his eyes. He looked 10 years older. Lillian was different. She sat silent and still in her orange prison jumpsuit. Her brown hair had been cut short. She had lost weight and looked thinner, more fragile than ever. But her eyes were the same, a placid lake with no ripples of emotion. She rarely looked at me. Most of the time, she just stared into space, as if in a world of her own. Their defense strategies showed the rift between them from the start. Price's legal team tried to paint a picture of a dedicated director, a respected philanthropist who had been deceived and manipulated by a mentally unstable nurse. They argued that Price had simply been too trusting of his staff and was completely unaware of Lillian's criminal actions. They tried to discredit my recording, claiming it was the words of a man trying to placate a distraught and hysterical old woman, and that his words had been entrapped and misinterpreted by me. Meanwhile, Lillian's court-appointed lawyer presented a completely opposite argument. They claimed Lillian was a victim, a tool in the hands of Alistair Price. They delved into her past, her status as a traumatized orphan, and argued that Price, as a figure of authority, had preyed on her vulnerability and her desire for a father figure to mold her into a killer. They claimed she acted under decades of psychological coercion and manipulation and therefore had diminished capacity. The trial became a battle between the two monsters, each trying to devour the other to save themselves. The first days were filled with tearful testimony from the victims' families, who were only now learning that their loved ones hadn't passed peacefully but had been systematically murdered. Financial experts followed, laying bare the complex fraud network of the Price Foundation. Then came Sarah Jenkins, the former social worker. She was now a white-haired woman in a wheelchair, but her voice was clear and strong as she recounted the story of her fateful encounter with a cold 8-year-old girl and Alistair Price's role in covering up the truth 35 years ago. Her testimony was a powerful blow to Price's defense, proving he knew about Lillian's nature from the very beginning. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom was silent. I took the stand, trying not to look at Lillian. Guided by the prosecutor, I recounted the entire story as calmly and factually as I could, from the deadly afternoon tea, to the discovery of the black notebook, to the recorded meeting with Price. Price's lawyer tried to attack my credibility during the cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitfield," he began in a condescending tone, "would you agree that you were in a state of extreme emotional distress and grief following the death of your son-in-law?" "Of course," I replied. "And is it possible that, in your grief, you misinterpreted certain events, perhaps imagined a conspiracy that didn't exist to explain a tragic accident?" "I did not imagine the smell of bitter almonds," I said, my voice firm. "I did not imagine the notebook cataloging their deaths, and I certainly did not imagine your client instructing me to destroy evidence." The recording was then played for the entire court. Despite Price's lawyer's best efforts to twist its meaning, his own words, echoing in the silent courtroom, condemned him. The arrogance, the condescension, and the clear instruction to destroy the bag were undeniable. But the real turning point of the trial came on the day Lillian was called to the stand. Everyone expected her to remain silent or to read a prepared statement from her lawyer, placing all the blame on Price. But Lillian did neither. When the prosecutor asked the first question, "Miss Whitfield, do you plead guilty to the charge of murder?" Lillian looked directly at him and answered in a clear, unwavering voice, "Yes." A gasp went through the courtroom. Even her own lawyer looked stunned. "And did you act under the direction of Dr. Alistair Price?" Lillian turned and looked at Price for the first time since the trial began. A long, cold stare. Price avoided her gaze. "Direction is the wrong word," Lillian said. "He was my teacher. He taught me that the world has its own set of rules, and that smart people get to write them. He taught me how to eliminate the unnecessary, the burdens on society. He gave me a purpose." Her testimony was not that of a manipulated victim. It was that of a proud student describing her mentor. She wasn't trying to excuse her actions. She was owning them. "So, did he order you to murder those patients?" "He didn't have to order me," Lillian replied, a barely perceptible smile on her lips. "We had an understanding. I knew who the right candidates were. I presented the cases, and he approved. It was an efficient system. She had completely destroyed both of their defense strategies. She wasn't a puppet on a string. She was an active partner, an enthusiastic accomplice. And in admitting it, she dragged Price down into the abyss with her. "And why did you attempt to murder your adoptive mother, Diane Whitfield?" the prosecutor asked his final question. Lillian finally turned and looked at me. In her eyes, I saw no remorse or hatred. I saw only a cold disappointment. "She was a flaw in the plan," Lillian said, her voice as flat as if she were discussing a technical problem. "The plan was for me to inherit her assets naturally. But she started to live too long. She became inquisitive. She started asking questions. She became an uncontrollable variable. In our system, uncontrollable variables need to be eliminated." The courtroom was silent. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, filled with pity and horror, but I felt nothing anymore. Lillian's confession, as cruel as it was, brought a strange kind of closure. It confirmed what I had always suspected. I was not a failed mother. I had simply tried to love something that was incapable of love. After that shocking testimony, the trial concluded quickly. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. On the charges against the defendant, Alistair Price, we find him guilty on all counts of first-degree murder, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Price closed his eyes, his tall frame slumping in his chair. On the charges against the defendant, Lillian Whitfield, we find her guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Lillian showed no reaction. She just gave a slight nod, as if it were the expected outcome. The sentencing followed immediately. Both received life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they were led away, Price never looked back. But Lillian, just before the door closed behind her, glanced back at me one last time. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes, an unreadable flicker. But then it was gone, and all that was left was the empty abyss. The trial was over. Justice, in a way, had been served. But as I walked out of the courthouse into the flash of cameras and the barrage of reporters' questions, I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt tired to my very bones. The media storm eventually passed. The news vans drove away, the reporters moved on to other sensational stories, and my town of Stockbridge slowly returned to its quiet existence, though now that quiet was scarred forever. Life went on, but no one would forget the story of the respected doctor and the dedicated nurse who turned a place of final rest into a death factory. For me, the silence after the trial was heavier than the noise before it. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison of memories. Every corner, every object conjured an image of Lillian, of Leo, of a stolen life. My copy of Pride and Prejudice still lay on the side table, open to the page I was reading before tragedy struck. I couldn't bring myself to read another word. The romantic stories now seemed naive and distant. I tried to return to my old rhythm. I went to the library, reshelved books, breathed in the familiar scent of paper, but something had changed. I no longer found solace in the pages. They were just other people's stories. My own story, a real-life horror, had consumed my mind. Leo was reinterred in his hometown in Ohio, next to his parents. His family was wonderful to me. They never uttered a word of blame. But every time I looked into their eyes, I saw their son convulsing on my living room floor, and a wave of guilt, as irrational as it was unshakable, washed over me. I knew I couldn't go on living like this. I couldn't let Alistair Price and Lillian steal the remaining years of my life. I hadn't fought to expose the truth just to wither away in misery. The decision came to me one spring morning, as I watched the first daffodils push their way through the cold earth in my garden. It was a symbol of rebirth, of resilient life, and I realized that I needed a rebirth of my own. I sold the house in Stockbridge, a place that held too many ghosts. I sold most of my furniture, keeping only my most beloved books and a few mementos of my late husband. I needed a completely fresh start, a place where no one knew who I was, where no one looked at me with pity in their eyes. I moved to a small cottage on the coast of Maine, near Portland, a place completely opposite to the rolling hills of the Berkshires. Here, there was the salty air of the ocean, the constant murmur of the waves, the cry of gulls in the sky. Here, nature was vast and powerful, making human tragedies seem small and insignificant. The first few years were not easy. Loneliness was a constant companion, but slowly, I began to rebuild my life, one small brick at a time. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering, teaching immigrant children how to read. I spent hours walking on the beach, letting the sound of the waves wash away the painful memories. I never visited Lillian in prison. I received letters from the penitentiary several times, letters written in her neat, precise script. I never opened them. Frank, who had become a good friend, read them for me. He said they contained no words of remorse, only cold analyses of the flaws in their system and accusations that if I hadn't interfered, everything would have been fine. There was no reason for me to read them. Our relationship ended the day she brewed that poisoned tea. Instead of clinging to a dead relationship, I decided to create new ones. I used a portion of the money from the sale of my house and the settlement from the civil suit against Price's estate to establish a small trust. I named it the Marginalia Fund, after Sarah Jenkins' report. My foundation funds independent, in-depth psychological evaluations for at-risk children in the foster care system. I work with professionals to develop screening tools to help social workers recognize the early warning signs of antisocial personality disorders, so that no marginal note is ever ignored again, so that no